Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Nick.
And I'm Alistair.
And this fortnight, it's a illustrious, awards-worthy episode as we tackle two things that will probably be back in our Best of the Year episode unless the rest of 2022 goes incredibly well. First up, we've got Everything Everywhere All at Once, the new highly acclaimed multiverse hopping film by the Daniels, aka Daniel Kwan and Daniel Scheinert. And then we've got the third and final run of Derry Girls, the incredibly popular Channel 4 sitcom about a group of teenagers growing up in Derry towards the tail end of the Troubles. But before any of that, Alistair, what other thing have you got to live up to those two titans?
Well, I've been watching another show that's been getting a fair amount of buzz. Once again, we're talking about an Apple TV show. I've been watching We Crashed, which is a drama series telling the story of the rise and fall of WeWork, the office sharing space company, starring Anne Hathaway and Jared Leto. It's a good show, I'd recommend it. I kind of mainly want to raise it in the context of a different show we talked about recently, which is The Dropout, which is again a streaming service drama series about the rise and fall of a notorious tech company from the last few years. We Crashed is very good. There's a lot of drama. Certainly the two leads are excellent in their roles. I really felt that compared to The Dropout, it doesn't quite get like sort of under the skin of the characters as much and kind of really get down to kind of what motivates them to completely oversell their products and have this meteoric rise and fall. It's more focused on the kind of crazy excesses of tech companies and modern startups and the excesses they go to and the sort of ludicrous business practices they adopt. It's more about that and less about, the psychology, more into the spectacle. But I would say it is certainly worth watching, especially if you're interested in these true life stories of tech scandals.
Yeah, I've only really heard of WeWork in terms of people complaining about them, to be honest, or saying that they are a place where you go to get taken advantage of.
Yeah, I've never had a company that worked in a WeWork. I mean, London is full of these co-working spaces of all sorts of different varieties. I guess, the thing about WeWork is that's how disastrously it was run as a business. There's one episode when basically every so often it just flashes up on the screen how much money they're losing. And it'll be, say, like 2.4 million a day, like losses and things like that. And it's just like, it's crazy that people could lose money that fast. It's utterly mind-bending.
I mean, they're still technically going, aren't they? But yeah, it's clearly not a triumph.
Yeah. But I guess it's interesting to see like behind the scenes and kind of the people behind it. Like it's mainly was created by the guy played by Jared Leto, who's a sort of a hype man and really like builds up the fact that this company is going to be the biggest company in the world and uses his own charisma and sort of, magnetic nature to get people to give him money and give him property deals and stuff to make this complete smokescreen look like a sane business. It's kind of, talking more about how this sort of, mission capitalism, I don't know what you call it, this like idea that like we're not just a company, we're a movement to save the world, and how he always hypes it up like we're changing human consciousness, we're changing the whole world, we're fighting loneliness by bringing people together. And there was a sort of lacing of this new age stuff going on, partly through his relationship with the Anne Hathaway character, his wife, who is a sort of yoga instructor and into a lot of new age and self-help things, and this kind of middle-class, socially aware veneer that's kind of slapped on everything allows them to hype up this company that's really got nothing behind it.
It's nice to see that Jared Leto's, in something that isn't being widely mocked, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, he's an odd one, to say the least. And obviously he was like really bad in Suicide Squad and Morbius Living Vampire, so he's not having a great time of it. And it is kind of weird how, this character who's sort of so over the top, so exuberant, so full of kind of crazy, unfounded self-confidence. The fact that it's played by Jared Leto kind of adds something to it, this sort of person who seems to be more hype than substance. I don't know, is that meta casting? I mean, I saw that he's an executive producer of the show, so if it is a joke, he's in on the joke, I guess.
Well, yeah, there's some traction to be had in being willing to make fun of yourself, I guess, especially considering that Jared Leto is arguably best known for his weird method acting or stories about him, taking these roles like the Joker stupidly seriously.
Yeah, there is like an odd intensity to him that I think also comes through his music and his band 30 Seconds to Mars that has a sort of extremely obsessive fan base. I guess there's this idea of this like some people are sort of strange but in a very, very magnetic way, and they use that to get away with things that we wouldn't let other people get away with, or they kind of use it to bypass scrutiny, whether that's been getting slightly dubious film products greenlit or whether it's like borrowing huge amounts of money from venture capitalists to prop up your ridiculous business.
Well, yeah, I guess there's definitely some crossover with that in terms of, I mean, I watched all of Silicon Valley in the end, and that's very much making fun of a certain type of weird messianic person who takes themselves far too seriously. So I guess I can see how crossing into that sort of caricature is viable for Jared Leto.
Yeah, there's a lot in this show for fans of Silicon Valley. Same with The Dropout. Obviously, this is a drama, not a comedy, but yeah, the whole crazy rivalries and sort of politics of tech companies, the sort of mad things that they lavish on people, the weird perks, weird ways of working, trying to make work fun for sort of millennials, the kind of Silicon Valley startup culture that is sort of both risible and very strange. So yeah, that runs through all these shows.
Yeah, but I assume We Crashed isn't taking the piss out of it quite as hard, or at least not as obviously.
Yeah, well, it's a drama. It's not played directly for comedy. There's bits that make you laugh, but they're sort of because it's based on a true story, though I'm not sure how much of it is true. It wouldn't surprise me if the most absurd bits of the TV show are the bits that are most true. But some of it's you kind of like, you think that's like a silly thing that they would do on Silicon Valley, but then you're like, oh wait, but they probably actually did that. One of the reasons maybe why they stopped making Silicon Valley is that it was no longer possible to parody tech companies because they became so ridiculous they were beyond parody.
I mean, honestly, I'm not sure if it was that tech companies became more ridiculous or that they just became more unfunnily evil. Like, I don't know if tech companies are... don't hear as much anecdotes about, tech companies being started with this weird messianic excess in the 2020s, as much as I do just tech companies being weirdly evil with algorithms.
Yeah.
I don't know if the Silicon Valley archetype of weird lunatics who think they're saving the world is quite as ubiquitous as it once was.
And obviously, in The Dropout, they really make the point that, the fact that, her medical testing machine didn't work, meant people suffered because they got misdiagnosed or weren't diagnosed with, things like cancer and stuff. And they really make the point that, this isn't just a tech company that failed. This actually hurt people. I assume that We Crashed is kind of hard to say one without the other, but I'm assuming that We Crashed is heading in that direction and there's going to be some poor ordinary people who lose their livelihoods. But yeah, and I guess, again, it's not quite as funny as the stuff in Silicon Valley. Anyway, so I've been catching up on the latest antics of capitalism. What have you been up to recently?
Well, in my quest to find something as culturally relevant and year highlighty as the things we'll be covering later, I watched Eurovision 2022, the annual festival of camp, arguably bad music. And yes, this was probably, I guess, about a week and a half ago by the time we released this episode, so perhaps not our most relevant moment, but it has happened, I think, since our last episode came out, so it does count. And yes, this, of course, was the year in which, among other things, the Ukraine won in a landslide, and then, not as notably, but also of some interest to our listeners, perhaps, the UK did okay. The UK came second, fairly solidly, which is, of course, impressive, considering I think this covers off 2 years of getting the famous nil point, thanks to putting through a series of very bad or boring songs that did not deserve any point, to be honest. But no, this year we had Sam Ryder, who released a very sharp, listable power ballad, and just seems like a very nice, charismatic guy, and he successfully won Europe over. It turns out maybe they don't just hate Britain indiscriminately, we've just been putting through some really bland songs.
I guess enough time has gone by, maybe, that people started to forgive Britain, or maybe it's just that, everyone hates Russia so much, who I believe were banned from Eurovision this year, were they?
Yeah, there was no Russian presence at Eurovision this year, so Europe did not get the chance to nil point them. Although, to be honest, realistically, someone would have given them a few points and then it would have been a massive scandal and so on. So yeah, it's very quick I should have banned them.
Yeah. I think, it's part of the cultural boycott of Russia. But it's great to see Britain doing well. I don't know, there was, from the Iraq War years through to the Brexit years, it looked like everyone in Europe was mad at us. I don't know, plus also I think we had a really shitty choice in artists.
Yeah, it just seems very half-assed and patronising a lot of the time. We seem to either put through very, very bland ballads that have nothing behind them whatsoever, or we seem to try and to confuse the sort of gleefully over-the-top fun camp of Eurovision with just kind of rubbish holiday camp entertainment. It wasn't ridiculous and fun, it was just slightly sad. If anyone remembers School Days by Daz Sampson, that for me is very much the nadir of Britain's recent run of Eurovision failure. And there's been a few instances of people you vaguely heard of, like Blue and Engelbert Humperdinck, turning up and delivering slightly bland songs and getting, again, very few points. Yeah, it's not been a proud few years in British history, but the Sam Ryder song was very good, very captivating, very sort of driving power ballad. Not my favourite song, called Spaceman, it has to be said. That's still Spaceman by the Killers, but decent tune. He was very close to the end of the running order, which I gather always helps stick in the minds of the voting public.
Also, yeah, honourable mention for Spaceman from Babylon Zoo.
Yeah, I thought about that, but I think I still slightly prefer the Killers one.
Fair enough. Yeah, there's something like fascinating about the kind of tone of Eurovision. And I think you really hit the nail on the head, which is like, I don't think Britain kind of gets the tone. I think some countries seem to take it more seriously than we do and put in like kind of artists who are actually good. Whereas we kind of, I don't know, maybe it's a sense of mocking British irony, or, you know, maybe it's the kind of the love of the kitsch or something like that. But we always think that like something that's just a bit crap is kind of what Eurovision wants. Whereas like Eurovision's not kind of crap camp silly. It's more like over the top, like so silliness. Yeah, I think this like I think we just really missed the tone of what, which may be almost trying to be too ironic, less of the sort of slightly earnest seriousness that Eurovision demands.
Well, yeah, I mean, the songs that actually win Eurovision aren't the ones that, you know, everyone watching them knows they're bad. There has to be some sort of actual sense of fun to it.
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, Sweden, who I think are quite well known especially in the last decade or so, for being very strong in Eurovision and always doing very well, I think kind of missed the mark this year by releasing a song that actually sounded like it was a good chart pop song that would actually do well in the modern charts. I don't know. I don't think that's quite what you're after either.
Sweden have won it a lot, haven't they? I guess they are very good at the pop music.
Yeah, no, they do usually hit the right level of massive, soaring chorus. That's what you want, really, a sort of a big, inspiring kick to your song. That's what the Sam Ryder song has, very, very tangibly. Like, a lot of ballads have won Eurovision, but you tend to want a ballad that's more a sort of James Bond theme-esque power ballad with a massive soaring chorus, rather than a sort of sappy one about your feelings or something.
Yeah. So yeah, a bit more like Total Eclipse of the Heart.
Yes, I imagine Total Eclipse of the Heart would be a good Eurovision song.
Yeah.
But yeah, so yeah, that's what we finally got the message and did. And for the record, just to prove I'm not, a blind patriot, there were some other good entries. I enjoyed the French one, which was a sort of weird folk techno crossover. And they sang it in, not usually French. I gather France are usually quite well known for entering songs stubbornly in French, even though a lot of artists to sing in English for maximum universal appeal. But the French entry this year sang in their native language of Breton, which is an even more obscure dialect from Brittany specifically.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and it was really good. I mean, it didn't do that well in the points, to be honest, which is, in my opinion, a crime. France was robbed. Finished 24th, what the fuck. But no, I thought it was a really nice tune. I mean, I like, folk rock and folk punk, so maybe folk techno is just an easy transition for me. But no, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I think there were a lot of good songs. Were there any other highlights?
I quite liked the Greek song. It did quite well in the points, to be honest. It didn't come particularly near dethroning us, but it was, I think, a nice ballad. It was sort of very musically. I think Graham Norton made this point possibly, and he was correct. It sounded very much like something from a good musical. It had this massive sort of soaring emotional chorus, which again I think it wasn't quite the power ballad, but it was still very much what you want in Eurovision.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, it's crazy. Britain doing well in Eurovision and in the football. I mean, have we finally left the dark days behind us?
I mean, who knows? I mean, there's another football tournament in the next few months, isn't there? So there's still time for us to disgrace ourselves.
That is true.
But yeah, and of course, Ukraine won, lest we forget. Deservedly so. It was a fun tune. I guess they could have gone with an inspiring ballad about human suffering, but instead they did this sort of folk hip-hop crossover tune to showcase the range of culture that is available in Ukrainian music, and it was quite fun. They had a man in a hat who looked like the guy from New Radicals. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I saw a lot of people commenting that they even had a Bez. So
and the Bears, yeah. I don't know if it would have won in a non-war year, but it was a fun performance, and I've got no particular problem with it, especially what with the war.
I've got respect for them for, putting in something that was on some level optimistic, and it must be hard to find optimism if you're Ukrainian or in the Ukraine. So the fact that they just need any sort of positive vibes whenever they can, rather than just doing the obvious thing, which is putting in power ballad about universal peace and love to pull on people's heartstrings.
It would have been an obvious move to try, but they didn't go for that, and respect to them. But yeah, no, it was a fun year, I think. I think it was one of the better recent Eurovision years. I'm not an expert, obviously, and my one hardcore Eurovision fan friend, who I don't think listens to the podcast, may well tune in especially for this segment and may well now be screaming at his stereo, in which case, sorry Dave, sorry if my Eurovision punditry was not up to your high standards.
I guess my question is, will it be hosted in the Ukraine next year, or does Ukraine get to nominate? Like, if Australia wins, I believe they get to nominate a host rather than it being hosted in Australia.
I believe Ukrainian President Zelensky has made a statement saying he would very much like to, or well, certainly intends to try and host it in the Ukraine next year, but in the event that they can't for war reasons, I think several countries have volunteered to step in and do it for them, including us. predictably.
It's probably the only way we're going to get to host it.
We might have won this year if not for the whole war thing, who knows. But yeah, so it might end up being in Britain next year. We were second place, I suppose, so there is a valid argument. It'll happen in Ukraine if it can, or if not, it'll happen here and be, I don't know, I'm guessing very heavily Ukrainian themed.
Next up in this episode, we will be discussing Everything Everywhere All at Once, starring Michelle Yeoh. Right, let's see if I can summarise this slightly strange film in 1 minute. The film follows Evelyn, who, along with her husband Waymond and daughter Joy, run a failing laundromat. Tensions are high in the family due to business pressure, an upcoming Chinese New Year's party, Joy wanting to come out to her grandfather, and a tax audit. During all of this, Evelyn is contacted by Waymond from a different dimension, and he shows her the ability to access other versions of herself in other dimensions. However, the whole multiverse is threatened by a dark, all-powerful, dimension-crossing presence who is building a sinister weapon. We saw this film in the cinema recently. Nick, what did you think of it?
Yep, fuck yeah, good film. Every so often you get one of these films that perfectly marries a sort of big weird premise with an emotional journey in a way that makes this sort of brilliant, fluid, metaphorical sense. And, you know, fully commits, shoots it well, casts the right actors, and yeah, you have a lot of fun, you have a little cry. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind springs to mind, as does Colossal, a film I still think didn't really get its due. And now here's Everything Everywhere All at Once to join a similar sort of club. I mean, you know, it's not a sister piece to those movies, it's not doing quite the same knowing American arty thing. I mean, if nothing else, it's clearly drawing a bit more on sort of martial arts films, including by casting Michelle Yeoh in the lead. But yeah, it's great. It has everything you want. It has a ridiculous and actually quite over-complex gimmick, but shot through with this sort of emotional truth that means you don't really care about the world building. Formally, it's great. The visuals, the tropes, the weird multiverse stuff, it just tosses out there, the way it plays with the nature of the film and the way it's being shot, but the way it always keeps coming back to the characters as well. Yes, I won't go into it in great detail quite yet, but yeah, no, I really, really like this. Great film. It's going to be interesting to see if anything can come at it for Best of the Year, because I mean, we're getting towards halfway through the year and it's winning so far.
Yeah, I really like this film. Yeah, it fully commits to its absolutely ludicrous premise, and yeah, just piles the weirdness on top of the weirdness throughout the film. Ridiculous story. It's got this real streak of absurdism running through it, that like every serious moment or anything that could be like a bit when they try to develop the sci-fi story or the, I don't know, the kind of meta concept behind the film, every time they try to do something with that, it also has a moment of just being really, really silly or something just utterly absurd thrown in. I don't know, one that springs to mind is there's a fight sequence when various characters are trying to jam a award for Audit Inspector of the Year up their bum for plot reasons that are entirely plot relevant, but also completely ridiculous. And there's also lots of other things along those lines that make the film very silly and very funny. But there's always this like powerful emotional bits to it. And it kind of always loops back to the same 5 characters, really. In fact, really just the kind of 3 core family members, and sometimes like the other members. Like it's always like looping back around, even though it goes to some quite strange places. You always kind of encounter the same characters wherever it goes. And every time something like a big moment in the film happens, there's like a big emotional moment that's kind of relatable for the characters. So, you know, it never gets too silly before it has a kind of, you know, a touching mother-daughter moment or something like that.
Well, yeah, a lot of the time there's actually quite a clever sort of bounce back and forth built into the film, which it always alternates between these sort of sincere emotional conversations and the sort of massive swinging ridiculousness. Partly using this sort of flicking between universes gimmick, it sort of jumps from her having these big superpower fights to her just trying to talk to her husband about their marital problems, and then it just keeps flicking backwards and forwards up to the point where Michelle Yeoh is expressing annoyance, but she's being dragged into more sci-fi shit when she's trying to have this conversation with her husband.
Yeah, and as the film goes along, it adds more and more alternative universes with different plot lines. There's the one that's the relatively straightforward domestic storyline that has its climax centered around this Chinese New Year's party that they're hosting in their laundromat. There's a universe when she's a chef, which has got a lot of good jokes in it, which we can spoil or not spoil. There's universe when Evelyn seems to be actual real-life Michelle Yeoh, or a version of her, a Chinese actress, martial arts specialist who went on to have a big successful career in Hollywood. So yeah, then there's also one particularly bizarre universe where everyone's just a rock. and you just get subtitles between the rocks talking to each other, which is especially funny.
Yeah, I mean, I like the form and inventiveness, and also the way it doesn't interfere with the actual story. Like, there's a lot of flourishes and embellishments here, like the bit with the rocks, where it could feel like the creators are being very much, look at us, isn't this clever? Look at us. But it somehow doesn't. It's very deftly handled.
Yeah, there's always a balance between it getting too silly before it comes back to being emotional. You know, if there's going to be a big sci-fi moment, like a kind of a showdown between two superpowered characters, it'll also make it somehow about her relationship with her husband, or her relationship with her daughter, or her father, who's one of the supporting characters. The fact that it keeps coming back to this kind of quite small core cast means even though when it's often sort of dimension transcending loftiness, it still feels very rooted in family drama.
Yeah, I think it's also admirable. I mean, this is, just about being a good film, I suppose, but it's also impressive how quickly it just gets the family dynamic across at the beginning. Like, the amount of time between the film starting and us going into the dimension jumping stuff isn't actually that long. They have a bit of back and forth chat in their home and their laundromat before travelling to the tax building where the bulk of the, main narrative thread happens. And yeah, everything just gets put across with impressive economy quite quickly.
Yeah, very, very deft.
Yeah, and also the acting, not just by Michelle Yeoh, who is, has been great in a lot of things in her time, and has been, in a lot of things I've seen recently, Michelle Yeoh has been being very good, but has never been the focus, so it's nice for her to finally have, a vehicle here to just really remind us all how great she is. But yeah, and Ki Hoi Kwan playing her husband Waymond is also really, really good. I imagine he might be a bit overshadowed by Michelle Yeoh in the general dialogue around this movie, but for the record, he's also great. He plays multiple parts and really sells a lot of almost more complicated, conflicting emotions pretty well.
Yeah, no, he's great. Yeah, Michelle Yeoh definitely having something of a moment, which really seemed to begin with a bit in Star Trek Discovery, which is an interesting platform for her to sort of reascend. I mean, she was a Bond girl in the 90s. She's done a lot of stuff, but yeah, she obviously was great in The Legend of the Ten Rings last year, and she's been doing quite a lot of good stuff. But, it's really great that she gets to star in a film now. I really liked Stephanie Hsu, I think it's pronounced. Sorry if I got that wrong. As the daughter, I thought she was great. And I didn't recognise Jamie Lee Curtis as the tax auditor until the credits. I really was like, wow, that is one of those transformative performances, I guess. They padded her out and given her, un-Hollywood hair, and I didn't recognise her at all.
I had a sort of, is that Jamie Lee Curtis moments a few minutes into her appearance, but I wasn't sure until I... Again, yeah, read the credits.
Yeah, so yeah, it's well cast. And also the fact that it keeps coming back to these characters means you see them in so many different guises and get to see them do such a range of, everyone gets to do a real range. I think at every point, pretty much everyone plays like a hero, a villain, a regular person struggling with some mundane problem, and like a superpowered dimension traveling, superhero. So, it's a dream part, pretty much all of them for any actor.
Well, yeah, and they end up establishing multiple different universes, some of which seem like they're just going to be silly jokes at first, but it's impressive how all of them seem to end up coming together in this enormous, ridiculous montage at the very end, which is gigantic, by the way. I think it's must be about 45 minutes long.
Yeah, the finale of the film.
Yeah, occasionally when wearing my boring critic hat, I sort of thought, could this montage be shorter and still achieve the same things? Did we occasionally veer into yes, we get it? But also the ideas and the acting are so fun that you don't really want them to cut anything, to be honest.
It is fully doing this absolutely ridiculous thing. Yeah, I guess if I had to criticise it, I would say it is quite a long film. It's 2 hours and 20 minutes. And most of the scenes in it are quite long as well, even though there's a lot of going on. There's all these different universes, all these different storylines. There's the dimension hopping storyline, and there's the kind of core family drama, which is quite multifaceted as well. There's within the family, there's lots of different things. There's a conflict pretty much between each family member and every other family member. So there's a lot in this film, but still it's long and it has very long scenes. There are some bits when I did feel, yeah, as you say, that okay, I kind of get this revelation or I get this moment. You don't need to keep piling it on, but I don't know. On some level, that's criticising the film for being itself. And I do like the fact that it had the courage just to be unashamedly itself.
Yeah, no, the way it explores this broad silliness, the commitment to the weird concept at the heart of all of these different multiverses. Pretty much everything here, they establish something, you laugh, and then a few minutes later they take that same thing again. They go back to it, even though you didn't necessarily expect them to, and they push it further. And that just makes it funnier. In a weird way, it's just extending it, sometimes beyond those first couple of beats. And yeah, and again, even if, yes, the film could arguably have been shorter, but the fact that it took the time to extend everything out to its logical climax like that is one of the things that's fun about it, and for that, they probably did need the length.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it works with it, and there's so much beautiful to look at in this film. There's a real, I don't know, design aesthetic running through the whole thing. There's the kind of the villainous character when she makes her appearance. The way they travel to different dimensions, there's always this like really ridiculous costuming going on. Some of it is like really like absurd, like this sort of almost pop star aesthetic, the sort of thing that people only really wear in music videos running through. Sometimes like each scene there'll be like multiple crazy costume changes that the characters go through as they kind of, I guess, flip between different versions of themselves in different dimensions, and every dimension has like a very like precise aesthetic. There's one that kind of looks like a sort of neoclassical vision of a Greek temple, and everything's white and there's marble and stuff, and people wear these steel visors. There's a bit when Joy turns up in a sort of goth cyberpunk thing with like massive black steel platforms and this huge gun from another reality, and it's like, I don't know, every moment they never pass up a moment to do something creative and original, which is one of the many great things about this film.
Well, yeah, like there's the grand climactic weird concept of it involving bagels, which again I have to admire their commitment to it and the way they sort of fed this imagery through it in a way you'd never actually get. And yet all somehow makes sense towards the end, which is kind of what you want, really.
Yeah, their complete commitment to the absurd. I don't think this is a spoiler, but I think it does perfectly sum up the film, which is the bizarre, weird thing that the villain is building, this kind of strange weapon. It could just have been, like, a lesser film would have just made it a sort of black hole thing that just absorbs matter and energy or whatever, sort of weird amorphous black blob. But in this film, it is a bagel that has everything in the universe on it. And it's just a giant floating bagel that contains everything. And I think that sums up the crazy absurdity of the film.
Yeah, obviously that is towards the end when we're very much spinning into, well, as the title says, everything happening all at the same time. Kind of. I mean, it's an impressive description of especially the experience of watching this film, especially in its second half, when you do just start cutting very quickly between universes and universes. Yeah, it's just an experience, really. It's a big, swirling experience. Yeah, no, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. In terms of structure, it weirdly reminded me of a film that is in many ways very different, which is sort of independent sci-fi film Primer, which is a much more low-key film. It's kind of done in a sort of documentary sort of esque style, which is to try and make it believable by being a bit more mundane. But it has a similar three-part structure, which this film kind of follows the same format, which is it begins with something mundane going on, and you kind of get a sense of the kind of the mundane life of the characters. Then it transitions to basically something strange happens, and you enter this new world that has kind of set rules for the strange things that are going on. And then you enter this bit when basically you're exploring the implications of this strange shift to reality that's occurred. And then during that section, complexities get piled on top of it as the true implications of the shift to reality that's occurred get piled on top of each other and multiply. Then in the third section, the entire story is consumed by these weird shifting, changing realities. In the premise has consumed the entire drama of the film. In this it's dimension hopping. In Primer it's time travel, but it's the same kind of concept expanding to consume the film structure.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
Yeah.
I mean, I assumed you were going to compare it to Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness.
I mean, that is one thing we've not touched on, which is we've now done 2 films in 2 subsequent episodes that are multiverse based. Again, multiverse having its moments. I don't know if it's broken through to consciousness. It's something that's been done in science fiction for yonks. I mean, there's a book back in the 50s even? And, obviously Doctor Who's done it a gazillion times, both new and old Who. And I'm sure Marvel Comics and other comics have explored this concept before. So it's not a new concept, but it's having something of a moment.
I mean, I'm assuming this film wasn't, conceived or in any way made as a reaction to other people, especially Marvel, doing multiverse stuff. But, if Marvel's multiverse flirtations get a bit more interest or eyes on this film somehow as a result, then fair enough. This is, in case that wasn't clear, a better film than Doctor Strange 2. But yes, if it can somehow get any traction or additional momentum from the multiverse movements, then all the better, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess it's something that mainstream audiences are now more aware of and find the concept more accessible. By the way, the novel from 1961 that I was trying to remember is called Worlds of the Imperium by Keith Lemire, possibly Lamar. But maybe it is one of those things where it's like a sci-fi concept has now bled through to the mainstream. It's been done to death in more trad sci-fi media from Doctor Who to Stargate. But now people willing to accept it, like time travel clearly had that probably around the time of New Who's kind of beginning. And maybe this is meaning this film is now, broken through to the mainstream. I've definitely seen people who tweet and Instagram whatever about general pop culture and stuff who aren't really into sci-fi guy, but really, really going for this film and saying, this film's brilliant, I can't stop thinking about it. So, it's definitely crossed over into the mainstream. And, I saw this at Curzon, London's swankiest brand of middle-class art housey cinemas. And obviously they were screening it a lot. So it's definitely captured the mainstream film fan zeitgeist.
No, yeah, this has really consumed a lot of my Twitter feed, yeah. I think it's got the right sort of middle ground between arty and mainstream action to, maybe cross over and become huge. Certainly become critically acclaimed. I don't know how it's doing financially, to be honest. I assume it's probably doing at least okay. I imagine it'll probably win some awards and live on in the consciousness.
It's still been programmed quite a lot a week after it's come out, so that indicates there's certainly demand for it. By the time this episode drops, it'll be about 2 weeks since this film was released. But if it's still screening near you, I highly recommend to go and see it. It's definitely a big screen experience, and it is a trip. I believe, as people say, it is. It's one to see. If you see anything this month, go see this. Finally, this episode, we will be discussing the third and final season of Derry Girls. The show follows the misadventures of Erin, Claire, Michelle, Orla, and James, teenagers from Derry, in the mid-90s, as they deal with their unusual families, teenage romance, their school's headmistress, who is a strict but not particularly observant nun, and looming adulthood. All of this is set to the backdrop of the Northern Ireland peace process. We've seen the complete third season and hour-long finale, all on Channel 4. Nick, what did you make of it?
Yep, this is another winner. Yeah, it was already a very good show. I think we covered it a while ago, and yet it's still very funny. I think the final couple of episodes, especially here, I think are probably going to be the ones that really push it into the annals of all-time greats. I think ending well is a very good way to really put a full stop on your already quite well-received show. And yeah, like a lot of good British sitcoms in the past, they did 2 to 3 years, realised, yeah, okay, we're not going to stay on for 8 to 10 years and milk this to death. Let's stop it while we can. And yeah, good choice. The final episode in particular both contains a lot of good jokes and also nails on a lot of these sort of combination of the general growing up is sad but necessary trope, along with the backdrop of the Good Friday Agreement, which... It's weird. Derry Girls, I've seen people talk about Derry Girls and say, oh, it's really more of a comedy drama, which isn't really a take I particularly agree with, because most of the episodes are just silly, like deeply silly sitcom episodes. The drama stuff butts in about once a series, maybe twice. It's not really playing with the sort of serious versus banality comedy drama beat in the same way that, say, Orange is the New Black regularly did. But if anything, that just makes it more impactful when the seriousness occasionally pops in. And yeah, as I think I've said before again, make me cry, get a good review, and Derry Girls did successfully pull that off towards the end.
Yeah, I would definitely file this under comedy. I mean, it's just so tight with the jokes. I mean, comedy doesn't preclude having drama or dramatic stories, but I just think the overall tone of the show is comedic, even though it does have like heartbreaking moments. I mean, I would really put this show up there with the greats of the kind of tight 2 to 3 season sitcoms. It sits alongside Blackadder, Father Ted, The Office, Fawlty Towers, Spaced. And I do not use those words lightly. These kind of, absolutely tight, only a few seasons, leave them wanting more sitcoms. Definitely end on a high and make people think, God, they should do more of this. But I know, just leave it. It's perfect as it is.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's practical considerations as well, insofar as there's only so long you can pretend these actors are teenagers. I think a fair few of them are over 30 as it is. But even without that consideration, I think they successfully got everything they could out of the characters and their relationship and picked a good time to stop.
Yeah, exactly. And with the final season, I think kind of really wrapped up the dual plot lines of the character stories and the historic background. I mean, the final hour-long episode really was brilliant, and it kind of weaved it all together purposely. It was all set in the build-up to the referendum on the Good Friday Agreement and also the main character's 18th birthday, basically perfectly concluding the stories when peace was achieved in Northern Ireland and the teenage characters we've been following for 3 years transition to adulthood. At that point, it's just sort of, it's wrapped up, done and dusted, leave it here.
Yeah, no, I think that's pretty accurate. Yeah, I liked the few, advances in character we got. I mean, there wasn't actually that much effort made to, conclusively file these characters away. I don't think we got any particularly big hints about, exactly what's going to happen. Will they go to university? Will they stay friends into adulthood? Will James and Erin get together? None of that was really addressed in any meaningful way, which I quite enjoyed.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting because my only criticism of the show is that I did prefer a neater wrap-up to the characters. Like, in the second last episode, there's a love interest introduced for Claire, and they kiss, and that's kind of it, and you never really find out what happens, and then she moves to Strabane, but you don't know if that relationship continues. Obviously in this series they had, and they've been building up it to a while, there's lots of hints of the relationship within the friendship group of James and Erin, and yeah, there's been lots of hints and stuff along the way. There's the bit in the second season when James takes Erin to their school prom and things along those lines. There's lots of stuff they built up. I know in the final episode at Erin's 18th birthday there's a bit of her and James dancing. I kind of wanted actually a wrapping up of that plot line. They leave most of the character stuff unresolved, even though the characters transition to adulthood and the peace process is concluded. It does finish, but there could have been more character resolution.
I get the feeling they are genuinely going to stop. Like, I don't think there's going to be I don't know. I mean, to be fair, this is British television. I would not be entirely surprised if they do a Derry Girls Christmas special in 4 years' time. Derry Girls, Where Are They Now, or something. It's not unusual for the British sitcom writer to be lured into doing that. Part of me hopes they don't, but it's not unusual.
Yeah, we'll see. And I kind of wish they'd leave it as it is. I think it's good. Partly because I don't know what they would do with the politics of it all. I'm not sure how, because obviously the politics are completely woven through this show, even though it's a kind of a show about how weird it is to be a teenager and also how silly these characters are and their sort of their families and things like that. But the politics is woven through it. So, and it concludes obviously with the peace process concluding. So the only way they could really do is if they jumped ahead to and did an episode about Brexit or the tensions in Northern Ireland now.
They have the opposite problem in that the characters in Derry Girls would have to be
in their 40s.
Like older than us by now.
Yeah.
And if anything, the actors are now too young.
Yeah, so I don't know how that wouldn't necessarily work. And it's so much about the promise of a teenager and how you look out to the world and see lights in your future, and to find out whether they achieved these things or stayed friends or if they got married or were pulled apart. Like, it might ruin it a bit. Like, there's the whole running thing about Erin wants to be a writer and she's got these pretentious ideas. It would kind of ruin it if you would find out that she became a writer or that she failed. Like, it's the possibility of what happens to Erin. Like, the very final bit of the show is a set in the present day, but it's just a brief cameo from Chelsea Clinton, who receives a letter that was a plot point of them writing to Chelsea Clinton in the second season. And it's a nice sort of wrapping up to it. But I was a little bit worried when at the end they went to present day New York. It was like, oh, we're going to find Erin's now a successful, New York literati type. And I thought, well, is that going to ruin it? But no, they didn't do that. They just had the actual Chelsea Clinton pop up for 2 minutes at the end, which was a funny and quite silly ending to it. And you get to find out what actually was the letter that they wrote. But yeah, I think if they did more and set it present day, it would kind of spoil it. Yeah, maybe they'll be lured back for a very Derry Girls Christmas at some point.
But yeah, I liked the Erin character, actually. I feel like she got a nice sort of subtle growth, especially in the sort of final series. I mean, she's always been kind of enjoyably awful, Erin. Awful in a way you can kind of forgive because she's a teenager. Like, if she was this awful and she was in her 30s or 40s, she'd be a, David Brent-style monster. But being this awful whilst being a teenage girl you can kind of have affection for her.
She's got very grandiose ideas about herself. Like, she wants the theme for her 18th birthday party to be literary greats, and and things like that. And the actress who plays her is phenomenal at both drama and comedy. Can I even pronounce this? I am supposedly a bit Irish, but...
Is it Saoirse? Is it the same as Saoirse Ronan?
It's pronounced similar but spelled differently. Saoirse Monica Jackson. She is phenomenal, and I really looking forward to her doing more stuff. I think she just pulls the most amazing facial expressions. Not since Jim Carrey has someone been so good at funny facial expressions. Jim Carrey's got a bit tired, but he really was brilliant at the comedy reaction look and things like that, and she is just hilariously funny. I mean, I've just googled her, and there's the 5-picture shot you get above your knowledge box, and one of them is just this amazing, slightly terrified, slightly confused sort of half frown thing, and she is just brilliant at expressions and conveying character emotions. I really hope she has a long and brilliant career ahead of her.
Yeah, no, she's really good, and sadly Nicola Coughlan, Claire, was on a reduced role in this final series due to conflicts with Bridgerton, which was slightly obvious in a couple of episodes, like that one where she got left at the station.
Yeah. Noticed the downgrading of the Claire role. And Claire is one of the brilliant comedy characters in the show, and Nicola Coughlan is great, and every episode the kind of Claire does a meltdown of some variety when she gets completely overwrought about something, and it is always hilarious. I think the final episode, between scheduling and probably COVID, there was a lot of different stuff, like Nicola Coughlan, Claire appears mostly on the phone, although there is a great conference calling bit when they're trying to conference call each other that is just hilarious. And there's a lot of shots of like straight on camera people talking to the camera shots rather than group shots, which gives the episode a slightly odd aesthetic, in almost a bit Wes Anderson as opposed to the kind of regular way they do sitcoms.
But it did also have like 2 separate large party scenes.
Yeah. But again, there's a lot of group shots and wide shots which people could be spaced out in, and then there's a lot of people standing by themselves. So I get the feeling it looked quite socially distanced, but it worked, and I kind of like the slightly odd aesthetic to the whole thing. Made it feel sort of luridly hyper-real.
Yeah, no, I don't know how much COVID there was or wasn't. I mean, we seem to be at a point where people can just mostly film around COVID without it being too obvious. Like, I watched Series 3 of Sex Education, which must have been filmed under COVID, but still featured a lot of crowded school scenes. But anyway.
Yeah.
Off topic. But yeah, no, I think everyone's good in this. Michelle actually also gets... Possibly because there's less Claire. I think if anything, it feels like there's a bit more Michelle in this series. She has some good bits.
Yeah, also, Jamie Lee O'Donnell is great and swearing all the time. I really liked the story in the final episode of her, which I don't think was revealed before, that her older brother is a jailed IRA dissident.
I did have a bit of a did we know that moment, but I couldn't remember. It's been a while since the first 2 series.
I don't think it's mentioned before, and it really gets across that, like, what it was like, that people just didn't talk about this sort of thing. I mean, all the characters would have known about it, so they didn't get some obvious clunky bit of maid and butler dialogue when Erin goes, "So Michelle, as you know, your brother is in jail because he's in the IRA, and this peace process means he might get out." But like, it all kind of comes out again. It's like people dammed up and stored this stuff up. But also just didn't talk about it, and then it all just comes flooding out at the point when the peace process means we have to reconcile of all of this.
Yeah, no, it was a nice sort of slight moment of related to the characters' real peace process drama towards the end without taking away from the large amounts of silliness.
I also saw a few people saying Jamie Lee O'Donnell should be the new Doctor Who companion, and if possible, with actually playing Michelle as the Doctor Who companion, because that would be amazing.
Yeah, it's like Malcolm Tucker was Doctor Who all over again.
Yeah. But I mean, we could single out almost anyone for being brilliant. There's the core 5 characters. I don't want to imply that Louise Harland as Orla and Dylan Llewellyn as James are not great. And obviously, Siobhan McSweeney? Siobhan. Oh, God. But yeah, I mean, there's a huge list of amazing characters. The wider family, Jerry, Erin's Da, is a brilliant, the straight man, the one person who seems to be sane in this world full of crazy people.
Yeah, no, the scenes with the family, again, I mean, we got a whole episode about the past of the family this year, rather than the family just having this sort of tiny comedy subplot in the background. And inevitably, the family were alarmingly similar to the present day, but in the past, it was...
I did like how, all the flashback to all their mums at high school, and they were all just like their daughters.
Complete with the random foreign guy following them around, yeah.
Yeah, there was a random not Irish person with them. I did like how Michelle's mum was like a proper 70s punk. It was a good episode. And obviously there's like the granddad Joe, he's just a phenomenal comedy character, just like oozing with menace in every scene. But then again, in his final episode, he gets a really touching speech about why peace is important. And, and in that moment when he talks about, maybe we could live in a world without murder and violence and soldiers on the streets, it makes you realise that, like, Granddad Joe's probably seen a lot of shit in his life. So, and the fact that he can still find it to be optimistic about the future is actually really, really touching.
Yeah, no idea. The last episode was, really lovely. I'm sorry, I'm always having an emotional moment just thinking about it. So yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
I must admit, there was a brief moment during the first episode of the new series where they brought in a Liam Neeson cameo, who I was a bit sort of, oh god, as Derry Girls, I don't know, is sold out the right word? Gone big, gone broad. But I think they pulled it back. I think the rest of the series did keep it around the usual level of silliness. There was an episode where they went and stayed in a haunted house, which I quite enjoyed.
Oh, that was brilliant. I
enjoyed all of them, to be fair, but that was good. That was particularly good.
That was extremely funny. But yeah, the Liam Neeson cameo, first of all, was brilliant. The fact they got Liam Neeson, and he was great in that episode, playing one of the rare Protestant characters in Derry Girls. I think chief of police for Derry, as the Ulster Constabulary, I think, was largely Protestant, which was one of the problems, which they do address in the show. But Liam Neeson I thought was excellent. And especially when he appears very briefly in the final episode during the referendum, and he takes off his hat and remembers Bloody Sunday, and then you get the clip of David Cameron apologising on behalf of the British government for Bloody Sunday. And that is incredibly moving. You know, Liam Neeson doesn't even talk in that bit, just like conveys so much sadness and pride and inner conflict in just like a few facial expressions. It's brilliant. I was really worried that they were like, when Liam Neeson turned up, and they would be like, please, in the last series, don't ruin it with too many cameos. I don't want every famous person from Northern Ireland to cameo in every episode. Please don't bring Kenneth Branagh out at one point, or have Van Morrison turn up, or the ghost of George Best or someone.
Sure.
But no, they had one massive celebrity cameo, and then that was it, which I thought was fair enough. I mean, they did do also the classic end thing, which is almost every supporting character got to come up and do a kind of a victory lap moment. They had Alden O'Hanlon, who most people remember as Father Dougal in Father Ted. He got to come back for the final episode. Uncle Colm, the boring uncle, got, appearance and stuff. The cool priest with the ponytail was back. The storekeeper was back. There was a bit of like, remember all the greats, but they're each going to come in for their kind of victory moment. But it did work, despite that could be hackneyed and cliched.
Well, it was an extra long, double-length special mega episode special thing, which I think does give you the space to weave in a bit of that self-indulgence without it taking over the proceedings.
So it worked, and and it was nice to see these characters again. Like I say, it's just so superbly cast. And just really sweet show. I mean, on some levels, it's like the whole thing's a kind of a meta commentary on nostalgia, because it's full of 90s nostalgia. There's an episode when they're going to see Fatboy Slim in concert. The soundtrack has got, everything 90s songs from like Fatboy Slim and Prodigy. Alternative Ulster and Suspect Device, I think, both made the cut, which was, as a fan of 90s punk, I really liked that. And obviously, they're from Northern Ireland, Stiff Little Fingers. There's a lot of great nostalgia. I think there's a lot of nostalgia in the costuming and stuff, and the kind of the fashion of the time. But there's also the fact that like it's kind of anti-nostalgia, because it really shows how grim and violent the past was. There's a whole bit when Orla's just having a little dance to herself and then runs into a military checkpoint to remind you that the past wasn't all beautiful. There were soldiers on the streets of British cities to keep the peace, or to oppress people, depending on who you ask. And the whole thing is a kind of meta commentary on like nostalgia. And there's almost a bit when, in the last episode, when Erin says, again, in one of her sort of piece to camera moments, I don't want things to change. She says, but maybe things can change for the better. Again, the kind of anti-nostalgia message of the show, which I thought was very powerful.
Yeah, I mean, it's been sort of in there. Famously, the last scenes of Series 1 had a similar, it wasn't all that great message. Obviously, without the catharsis of the peace agreement. Yeah,
the famous bombing. I did know what it was and now I've forgotten. Yeah, but that famous, very bad bombing in Derry. Yeah, if anything, there was slightly less politics in this season, and I think that kind of actually made sense and kind of worked, because the second season ends with the ceasefire. So there's obviously things are less dangerous, although obviously there was always this tension and they were negotiating peace and violence could flare up at any moment. And obviously then they kind of bring it all together with the referendum on the Good Friday Agreement in the final episode, and there's bits and pieces about politics. But I kind of liked how, after the ceasefire, it touched their lives less. It showed the kind of steady improvements in things.
Well, yeah, plus, you're going to do an extra length finale about the referendum. I guess, you've got plenty of politics coming.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, a good time. Another classic for the ages. As I say, I imagine we will return to this in our Best of the Year special. It's going to have to be one hell of a year to knock this out of the top 5, I imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the only thing it even compares to this year is probably Severance, but it's so hard to compare, a dark drama to a comedy. But I guess we'll have to by the end.
I was going to say, I'm afraid the format necessitates it, Alistair. You're going to have to do it anyway.
We're committed to it at this point. We're committed to the format.
Note to self, must watch Severance.
Yes. But again, if you're waiting on Derry Girls to see how it ends, and it's only 3 seasons, 6 episodes a season, 20 minutes an episode, then like a 40-minute finale, they're an hour with ads. So it's not a huge commitment. And I really did put it up there with, certainly right now, feeling pretty good about it after recently watching it. It's up there with your Blackadders, your Spaced, your Fawlty Towers. And, again, do not use those phrases lightly.
Okay, and that was Moderate Fantasy Violence for this fortnight. Thank you very much for listening. If you have enjoyed this and want to experience still more, you can go to moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can see a lot of purple, our logo, some old episodes, some deleted scenes, some essays by mostly Alistair. Check it out, and if you enjoy it all, then go to your podcast app of choice and leave us a nice 5-star review. Thank you.
You can also find more of us on Twitter, where we are at MFV Podcast, or follow us on Facebook by searching for Moderate Fantasy Violence. If you want more from me, I'm on Twitter at AlistairJRBall, or you can visit my website, gmail.com.
And I've been Nick Bryan. You can find me at nickmb on Twitter or nickbryan.com on the wider internet. Or if you're at London MCM Comic Con, I think the weekend immediately after this goes up, like the 27th to 9th, then I will be there at a table in Artist Alley, table H5, I believe, selling my comics. Come and buy some, please. But whether you buy the comics or not, we will be back in a fortnight with another Moderate Fantasy Violence, in which we'll be covering the first half of Better Call Saul Season 6, the climactic run of the Breaking Bad prequel, and then we will be covering the new season of Love, Death and Robots, the animated anthology from Netflix, which of course means, yes, another top 3. See you then. Bye-bye.
Bye. Cool. Toilet, water. Oh, not again.
Fortunately, our toilet was blocked, but is now unblocked.